One thing I learned from my granddad is that family is one of the most important things in life. He gave so much of his life to his family, and that is a memory that I will always cherish about him. Some of the best memories I have with my granddad is when he would pick me up and my other cousins to go to church on Sundays, and later we would all head to the arcade on the boardwalk and play games for hours. We would sing Duke of Earl and other beach music in the car, and he would try to teach us the words to every single song. As time passed and we all got older, our arcade days were over, but he always made sure we had a place to go and eat after church. He didn't care if it was just his family or the 5 other friends we would bring with us. He just wanted to spend time with the people he loved. One quality my granddad possessed that I will always admire is how much he cared not only about his family and friends, but his community. His achievements throughout his life are an aspiration for someone who wants to follow in his footsteps. When I told him I wanted to get involved with politics, his first response was, "Why?" But when I explained to him my reasoning, he replied that he would do anything he can to help me reach my goals and would always be there for me. I remember when I got my Clemson acceptance letter in the mail. The first person I wanted to call was my granddad. Growing up and hearing about his days at Clemson and riding in the 15-passenger vans for game days definitely made my decisions easier. I'll never forget how happy he was when I called him. But he wanted me to know that no matter what school I decided on, he was proud of me. Granddaddy, you will be missed in so many ways. You're not only an inspiration for me, but for the many lives you've touched as well.
What Dan meant to you and to your family and to this community. The Sun News, thankfully, wrote an article that was in yesterday's newspaper that I think captured a part of my dad's contributions to this community, something that he learned at an early age from his parents and grandparents and siblings. And so there's no need to repeat what he has provided and how he has served this community. But I do want to say this as I reflect on my dad's life here in his later years as he was retired and he was able to do some things that he wanted to do more personally. Ocean View Baptist Church was very special and close to him. But in addition to that, he reached out to other churches and would visit early Sabbath at First Presbyterian Church on Thursday, or he would visit the Methodist Church on Sunday, and he invited friends and family. And on a day like today that we know we're celebrating that he is living eternally, I think about the fact that we all are imperfect people. He was an imperfect man, and we live in an imperfect world. But yet God's peace, mercy, and grace is presented to us in John 3:17, which God sent his Son not to condemn this world, but to save this world. I want to thank you for all the love and the care that you've provided to me and our family in this time of deep sorrow and challenge and loss. But I and my family know that my dad lives eternally because of God's grace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wayne. My name is Roger Gray, and my dad was Dan P. Gray. And I'd like to take a few moments to talk about some of the lessons that my dad taught me and my siblings over the years. And these lessons have certainly helped shape the person that I've become and my siblings have become, and really helped me as an educator. And I shared many of them with students and parents over the years. One of the first lessons that he taught us when you introduce yourself was to always state your full name. It was important for him to tell us that when you speak to somebody, you want them to know who's talking to them. He'd also tell you to speak clearly, slowly, and distinctly. I used to think that was because of his hard of hearing. But he was really telling us, think before you speak. And when you speak, make those words count. Take your time. He'd always say to you, when you're speaking to someone, always look clearly in their eyes and give them your undivided attention. As a kid, you learn not to take your eyes off my dad when he was talking to you, or he would call you out on it. If you look down at your watch, or now as many do, look at their cell phone to see what time it is, he would abruptly stop. You got somewhere to be? No, sir. But he was really telling you, be a good listener. Listen. Listen to what people are saying to you. If you listen, you may understand what it is that they're trying to tell you. My dad always encouraged you, if you do not know something, don't be afraid to ask questions. He would tell you there was never a dumb questions. If you were ever in a conversation with my dad, if you sat and listened to him for a while the conversations would be him asking you questions. They would be long and in-depth. Sometimes they may have felt like an interrogation. But he always wanted to know as much information and knowledge as he could get in any situation before he could offer some advice or some help. Other lessons that I learned, when you were told that you were going to mow the grass on Saturday, he'd always ask, when do you prepare to mow the grass? Of course, I would say, on Saturday morning when I get up. He'd look at you and say, wrong answer. On Friday afternoon, you go see if the lawnmower crank, do you have enough gas? You don't want to do anything that prevents you from accomplishing that task on Saturday. There will be no excuses. Most of the time when I received a spanking for something that I had done wrong, right before he would spank you, he would look at you and say, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. At the time, I did not believe him. But he'd always say this after he explained to you what you had done wrong. He would take time to try to help you understand so that you could learn from the mistake that you made. I really did not understand this phrase until the first time I had to pop my daughter Mabry on the leg because something she had done wrong. When she looked at me with her beautiful blue eyes, tearing up, I had to leave the room and go cry myself. But it was something that had to be done so that I could help her be the person that she's become. If you're going to say something negative to a person or a group, you make sure that who you're making those comments to know they're coming from you. As a kid, my dad took us to the ACC baseball tournament when it was being held in Clemson one time. I was 9 or 10 years old. We're sitting in the parking lot at the Holiday Inn, and the NC State baseball team pulls up in their bus. My dad was in the office checking in or something like that. And I start hollering from the window, NC State sucks. Y'all gonna lose. Of course, I was hiding behind the window, behind the door. My dad happened to be walking out of the office door, and he got in the car and he said, son, if you're gonna talk trash, you're gonna talk it where they can see it. He made me get up out of that car, walk over to the front of that bus. He was standing behind me. He said, now go ahead. And of course I knew I had to say it, because if I didn't, he was gonna give me that spanking. So as I started crying, they'd taken me up there, and I was back there sweeping in the back, and there was a guy back there, and his name was Bobby. I think his name was Bobby Brown. Bobby Brown. Kind of short guy. Bobby was always laughing and cutting up, and one day he was teasing with me, or teasing at me, and I got mad. And I said, Bobby, I'm gonna have my daddy fire you. My daddy happened to be coming down office from upstairs and heard me. He flew down them stairs. He jerked me up, looked at me, and he said, "Son, that man puts food on our table. You won't talk to him that way." Then he commenced to take his belt off and said, "Bobby, I want you to watch this." Gave me a good whipping. You know, Bobby even actually felt sorry for me. But it was an important lesson about understanding that we're all in this together. Another time, we were coming back from a ball game. My dad took us to ball games all the time, and we could always invite friends. At one time, we had some friends, and we were coming back home, and one of the people that we took home didn't live in the nicest neighborhood. And I was making fun of the neighborhood that he lived in. My dad never said nothing to me in front of that young man at the time, because he didn't want to embarrass him even more than I'd already done. But as soon as we got around that corner, he reached back and jerked me and grabbed me and said, "Son, you never talk about a place where a man lives or where children live. They're doing the best that they can, and we're going to respect them for that." My dad, growing up, gave me some rules of engagement for fighting. And these were rules that I use as a principal to tell students when is it appropriate to fight. Because he would never say, "I'll never say you won't fight." So when is it appropriate? So he would talk about it, and he said, "The first thing you do is you never talk about getting somebody. You never talk about, 'I'm going to get you after school, I'm going to meet you at the park. You know, we're going to set a date and time to settle this matter." He said, if it was important enough to fight, then it was important enough to fight right then and there. If it wasn't important to fight right then and there, it really wasn't important. He did tell me, though, that once you commit to fighting, you go to town. Right? Don't let him up. Now, he wasn't talking about taking him out, but what he was talking about, if somebody hits you and you turn around and just hit them back, he said, that's not defending yourself, that's revenge. And revenge doesn't solve anything. That doesn't solve the problem. That escalates the problem. He said, use the 4P principle. What's the 4P principle? You're willing to fight in front of the principal, the preacher, the policeman, and your parent. And if all four of them say that's what you need to be doing, then you go ahead and do it. But if only one of them says there might be a different way to handle this situation, then think about your actions. Think before you respond. And finally, he would say, always expect consequences for your actions. Always expect consequences. How you see things at the time may not be the way others see it. And so sometimes when you got punished or in trouble, you could understand why those happened. I used to tell that story all the time to parents. Being a middle school principal, they would come in and say, when can my kid fight? When can my kid defend themselves? You know, and I would try to relay that story to them. The importance of education. Education was very important to my dad. He knew that that was a key to success in life. When I was in high school, we went to high school at a time when you had to graduate, and I was telling folks this the other night, that when you had to graduate high school then, you only had to have 17 credits. You only had to have 3 math credits. What kind of credits? Just math. not really the things that may give you the greatest opportunity to be as successful as you possibly can. But I can remember him sitting down with me and saying, you're going to take 4 years of math, 4 years of English, 4 years of science, and 4 years of social studies. You're going to take the highest class that you can possibly get into, and you're going to make a B or above in each of those classes. At the time, I didn't realize why he was saying that, because I said, look, Dad, we only got to do 17. But he was laying that foundation. Son, if you want the opportunity to have choice in life, you need to have that education. And I'm appreciative of that. And he was always supportive in my endeavors in school. Last night I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't get all this down in my head. I could go on forever. But so I started just writing some things down that come to my mind. Eating was a big part of our family. My dad loved to feed people. And we would always, as a kid, go to the Silver Hook. Those of y'all can remember that. And but over the years, we would go to other places, usually places that didn't have a long line. But he would always say to you, get what you want, but eat what you get. Trying to tell us to make sure that you don't go through life wasting things, and the importance of eating and sharing fellowship with people. He also taught me sometimes you do things for others that you don't want to do. When I was 14, about May 15th, my dad called me up and said, you're going to South Carolina Conservation Camp. I'm like, what? Yep. Your grandmama, Gray, is in the garden club, and they send a person to the conservation camp every year. And you have to be 14. Well, why me? It's your turn. I didn't necessarily want to go, but I ended up having a great time. I think it was at Sherrall State Park. And I can remember Grandmama and Aunt Ellen coming to pick me up after conservation camp was over. My dad would talk to us and say, as I got older, he'd say, one of the hardest things he had to learn was willing to let your child make a mistake when he knew that he could prevent the mistake. But he knew it was more important that the child learn more from making the mistake than stepping in and preventing from making it. And that was hard, and it's hard now. As us who have children who've grown, and you're sitting there going, I wouldn't do it that way. I wouldn't do it that way. But you kind of say, well, they got to learn. They got to learn. My dad had tremendous strength. He showed this in many ways. Most of y'all may not know this, but early in our childhood, my dad had a problem with alcohol. He was able to overcome that. My dad was a smoker, 2 packs a day. When you used to go up to the Graco Steel office, sometimes there'd be that fog. That would be there. I can't tell you when he quit, but I don't think he's ever smoked in front of my children. So it's been over 25 years. But a tremendous person who can just stop that and quit it. He beat cancer. Beat it twice. Beat it when he had melanoma, and that was bad, although he didn't let us know it at the time. And in the last few years, he's had some bouts with bladder cancer and that type of thing. And you never know, but it never stopped him. Of course, he also had strength in having 4 kids. 4 kids within 6 years, sometimes that's not the right way to do things. He always provided us with cars. we were always able to wreck them. He put kids through college, 3 at one time. I can't imagine the stress of having 3 kids in school at one time, and none of us of the first 3 were on the 4-year plan. And so we were there for quite a while. I went to 3 different schools. So I did graduate with 169 hours. So. Helping others was always important to my dad. As Wayne has mentioned before, he served in many organizations, church, that type of thing. Of course, he was big into politics. You know, last night I'm standing in line and there's 2 folks who come by and they have run for office in the last few years. And they said, you know, when I announced I ran for office, was running for office, your dad, I didn't know him, but he would call me out of the clear blue and ask, can I take you to lunch? And he said, not only would he take me to lunch, but then he would take me around and meet all the different people that he knew. He knew that it was important for people to participate in government. And even though you might be on the other side of his thought process, it was important that you still engaged each other to come together to solve problems. He was proud of his service to the Horry County Planning Commission and the State Tech Board, and his latest thing was the Solid Waste Authority. My dad was not afraid to let you know where he stood. If you ever read one of his posts on Facebook, you would understand. I got a phone call from my superintendent, Dr. Maxey, and he called to offer his condolences yesterday, and he said, I never met your dad, but I read his postings on Facebook. He was a very interesting man. But I was appreciative of that. My dad would be too, because he would say he knew that the man read his postings. And if people commented on him, right, again, he's engaging in that, that conversation that you needed to have. My dad always told us that a man is not judged by his mistakes, but is judged by how he overcomes them. And so he would tell us that, when mess happens, you don't put your foot down on somebody that they can't overcome it. And he said that's really where you're going to be judged at, because we all make mistakes. My dad's love for kids, his grandkids, nieces and nephews, and anyone else who ever showed up at our house. He'd always talk to them, engage in them, hug them, love them, kiss them. I mean, I know they'd say, come here and give Uncle Dan a kiss, and they'd always go over there to him. And as I go back through and I hear from my cousins and nieces and nephews and that type of thing, they always tell how important he was and how happy that he was inclusive with them. Steve and Denise, even Josh, Lance's good friend. Josh did my heart good yesterday when you said, I'm glad you came from California. And he said, I wouldn't miss Granddaddy's funeral. And that was just the undying love that my dad was showed to whoever. I ain't got too much more to go. I would say that in the end, I knew that my dad loved me, and he loved his children. Didn't always like the way he showed it. Didn't always like to understand it. At any time. And throughout my life, when there would be difficult times and circumstances, I could call on my dad, he would answer, and he would be there to help in whatever way he could. In closing, I would like to thank my sister Danette and Denise for the love and care that they've shown for my dad over his recent illness for the last 6 weeks. They put a lot of time and effort staying there with him and being with him during those times. And sometimes that was hard because my dad is a gray. He don't like people knowing his business. Okay? And Denise, I was thankful that you were there on Tuesday night, that he was not alone. And I cannot pay that for you, but I'm thankful that you were there. I do want to thank y'all for coming out today, and I do want to thank you for enduring my time up here, and we'll turn it over to Michael.
Just like to start by thanking everybody that was coming, or everybody that came. I know this will mean a lot to Dan, and he was a great man. You know, he had a big impact in my life, especially there at the end. But I just wanted to get started. He's a big man with the church. You know, he had always been with the church, and in this past little bit of time of going through the house and getting everything cleaned up, we found a letter that was sent to him in August of 1954. And I just wanted to read one thing in it that they had wrote. And it said, "You have a wonderful future ahead of you, and I hope that you will use your wonderful talents for the glory of God." And I think he carried that with him every single day. And you know, I wasn't always as involved with the church as I should have been. I did get involved a little bit whenever I was a little bit younger, but it was only because of him. You know, he would do whatever it took to get me here. He would give me $20 just to come and sit in church. Take me out to eat wherever I wanted to go afterwards. Whatever it took to get me here, that's what he was willing to do. I mean, I didn't understand it back then. Back then it was just, we go to church to get $20. But now I see it as how important it is to just keep in church and keep your family in church and keep your family together and close to you. 3 years ago, I lost one of my brothers, and it was a really hard time for me. I kind of started to fall away from the church, and I had a hard time with everything, you know. But I talked to one of my coworkers, and he kind of explained things to me in a way that really touched my heart and kind of made it a lot easier for me, and I just wanted to share that with you guys today. He told me that sometimes people are taken from us whenever they have the greatest impact on the most people and their lives and changing their lives, because sometimes that's just what people need as a turnaround. And that was just something that really spoke out to me and just brought me back to the church, and it really made me stay with the church. And you know, up until Dan's last days even, he was changing my life. He really was. You know, he was a great man, and I mean, I regret not having as much respect for him whenever I was younger as I do now. But the most happiest times I've had with him were in his last days, that I just was sitting in the sitting in the hospital with him, and he was talking to me, and you know, he was just sharing stories, sharing Dan thoughts, you know, and you interrupted him, he wouldn't be afraid to look at you and still, shut up. Can you just shut up for a minute? Because that's just the type of person that he was. If he had something to say, he was going to say it. But out of all this, you know, he taught me the most important thing in life is your family. And standing beside them through the thick and the thin, no matter what it takes. And that's what he always did for me. I mean, I was a kid. I got into trouble just like all of us, you know. I didn't have the easiest times, but no matter what hard time fell upon me, Dan was always the first one there to make sure that I had somebody by my side and somebody to look out for me. Because it's just who he was. Family was everything to him. And I just pray that we can all live vicariously through that and come together as a family throughout this. I mean, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Michael Matan. I was his stepson, but I looked at him like a father. He was my father since I was 5 years old. That's whenever they got married. And, you know, every day he had an impact on my life. And maybe I was ignorant at the beginning to realize how blessed I was to have him in my life, but like I said, up until his last moments, he was making a great impact on everybody's life, and especially mine. I couldn't thank him enough for that, and he taught me how to be a man. I mean, I don't know what I would do without him today. I really don't. I don't know where I'd be or what I would do, because he didn't care what I did wrong. He didn't care about the bad decisions that I made. All that he cared about was that I was going to learn to make the right decisions. And I'll just leave it at that, and thank you all for coming. And like I said, I just pray that this can bring our families together, because, you know, we've all had our separations and we all have a busy life, but I just pray that we can all be there for each other, especially in this hard time, and just come to celebrate his life as great as it was. Thank you.